The courtroom went dead silent until 50 Cent dropped the names, and all hell broke loose. In a jaw-dropping turn of events, rapper 50 Cent has just delivered explosive testimony in federal court that's rocking the music industry to its core. Under oath, he exposed what he called a dark web of manipulation and coercion orchestrated by Sean Diddy Combs, alleging that the hip-hop mogul used power, isolation, and fear to entrap young stars behind closed doors. And then, the bombshell 50 names. Usher, Justin Bieber, Kevin Hart, Fabulous, YK Osiris, and more. What followed was chaos, panic, and a media storm the industry wasn't ready for. Stay with us, because what just happened may change hip-hop forever. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The air inside the courtroom was already heavy with anticipation long before the proceedings began. The murmurs were hushed, yet electric, a quiet storm rolling beneath the surface. Reporters fidgeted in their seats, eyes flicking between their notes in the entrance where one man's name was whispered over and over again. Curtis 50 Cent Jackson. When he finally entered, suited, stoic, and flanked by his legal team, the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't just another celebrity spectacle anymore. This was something else. Something dangerous. In a federal courthouse in Manhattan, the epicenter of a sweeping criminal investigation into music mogul Sean Diddy Combs, the stakes had just escalated beyond imagination. What began months ago as a complex case involving alleged human trafficking, racketeering, and coercion had now evolved into an outright cultural earthquake, threatening to topple the towering icons of the entertainment world. But nobody, not even the prosecution, was fully prepared for what 50 Cent was about to unload. There were rumors. There always are. People speculated that 50 Cent might offer testimony that would expand the scope of the trial. But what he actually delivered under oath was a scorched earth account of systematic abuse and hidden predation at the highest levels of the music industry. And it was laced with names so well-known, so revered, that even the seasoned courtroom officials were momentarily stunned into silence. "Mr. Jackson, do you recognize the defendant?" the prosecutor asked as a formality. 50 Cent didn't blink. "Yeah, I've known him since I was a teenager," he answered flatly. The room leaned forward. "What I'm about to say," he continued, his voice low but cutting, "is gonna make a lot of people real uncomfortable. But I've stayed quiet too long. We all have." And then he began. Like the ticking of a time bomb reaching zero, he started naming names. Usher, Justin Bieber, Kevin Hart, Fabulous, YK Osiris. One by one, each name detonated in the courtroom like a blast of dynamite, drawing audible gasps from spectators and media alike. Some reporters instinctively grabbed their phones, forgetting for a moment that recording inside federal court was strictly prohibited. The judge banged the gavel in vain. Control had slipped. "Are you saying these individuals were sexually involved with Mr. Combs?" the prosecutor asked carefully. 50 Cent nodded, jaw clenched. "Some of them willingly. Most of them? Not so much. You see, Diddy had a system. He made you think you owed him. Then he made you think you couldn't say no." The courtroom fell deathly silent. No scribbling of pens, no clicking of keyboards, just silence. Everyone was trying to absorb the scope of what had just been said. A system? That word changed everything. A system implied planning. A method. Intent. 50 Cent went on to describe a network of secrecy and submission, where young artists were lured with promises of fame, money, and creative freedom, only to find themselves isolated, manipulated, and subjected to a new set of rules dictated solely by Diddy. According to his testimony, it all started with parties, lavish, secluded affairs in mansions with no phones allowed and NDAs signed at the door. The parties were never about music. They were about control. You get someone in the room, surround them with people who act like this is all normal, and eventually, they start to think it is, 50 Cent said. That's how Diddy did it. He turned the industry into his own playground. And we let him. The prosecutors let him speak uninterrupted for almost 45 minutes. No objections from Diddy's team, who looked paralyzed by the barrage. Perhaps they were calculating the fallout. Or maybe they simply didn't know how to respond. This wasn't just about a criminal charge now. It was a public reckoning. A cultural moment. A reckoning long overdue. 50 Cent spoke about young men and women, some minors at the time, being flown out to private islands, penthouse hotels, or hidden estates where Diddy and his inner circle conducted what he called grooming weekends. He claimed Diddy operated like a cult leader, slowly tearing down boundaries and reshaping reality for his guests. He'd tell you your family, 50 Cent said. Then he'd tell you family doesn't have secrets. Then he'd make sure you never forgot it. The Courtroom's collective pulse seemed to rise with each passing moment. When he described Diddy allegedly keeping video footage of certain encounters as leverage, there were gasps again, followed by the rustle of reporters cross-referencing old tabloid rumors with this new sworn testimony. In the middle of the room sat Diddy, eyes narrowed, jaw locked, arms folded tight across his chest. For a man whose career was built on the art of spectacle and power projection, his silence was louder than any outburst. This was not just another accusation. This was someone with intimate access, someone with receipts or the suggestion of them. And unlike others, 50 Cent was not afraid. He had the resources. He had the platform. And, more than anything, he had the public's attention. As 50 Cent wrapped his testimony, he turned to the gallery and locked eyes with the crowd. "We keep asking why this stuff keeps happening," he said. "It's because we protect predators. We call them visionaries, moguls, icons. But they're just men. And men like that don't stop unless someone forces them to." The judge called a recess. Everyone stood. And for a full 10 seconds, nobody moved. The weight of what had just transpired rooted everyone in place. It was only when the bailiff shouted, "All rise," that people began to stir. The murmurs returned, louder now, buzzing with disbelief and urgency. Outside the courthouse, chaos reigned. Reporters scrambled to deliver breaking headlines. News vans parked illegally, antennae raised, as anchors reported live against the backdrop of one of the most explosive celebrity trials in modern history. The public reaction was instant. Social media exploded. Trending topics were dominated by names: 50 Cent, Diddy, Usher, Bieber. Hashtags calling for justice, accountability, and deeper investigation swarmed across Twitter and TikTok. Diddy's Wikipedia page was locked from edits. Crisis PR firms mobilized like emergency crews after a bombing. Meanwhile, 50 Cent, calm and composed, walked out of the courthouse with the swagger of a man who had just emptied the final chamber in a years-long game of psychological warfare. He didn't answer questions. He didn't need to. He had said everything that needed saying in court, under oath, for the world to hear. This moment wasn't just the climax of a beef. It wasn't about rap rivalries or tabloid gossip anymore. This was a formal declaration of war against the old guard of hip-hop's shadowy elite. And judging by the eruption it caused in and out of the courtroom, the first shot had landed hard. As the sun began to set over Manhattan, casting long shadows over the courthouse steps, one thing was clear: the music industry would never be the same again. Not after this. Not after today. Because when 50 Cent spoke, he didn't whisper, he detonated. Curtis James Jackson III, better known to the world as 50 Cent, is no stranger to controversy, power moves, or the brutal truth. Over the past 2 decades, he's built a reputation not only as one of the most successful rap artists in the world, but also as a fearless entrepreneur, television producer, and cultural disruptor. He's never been afraid to say what others won't. And this trait, more than any accolade or platinum record, is exactly what made his testimony in the federal case against Sean Diddy Combs so critical and so dangerous. Born in South Jamaica, Queens, Jackson grew up amid poverty, drugs, and violence. By the age of 12, he was already dealing crack cocaine in the streets while living with his grandmother. His mother, Sabrina, was a drug dealer who died in what was widely believed to be a targeted hit when Jackson was just 8 years old. These formative years hardened him, not just physically but psychologically. Survival wasn't a concept, it was his default operating system. And this survival instinct would later mold him into one of the most calculated and strategic players in both music and business. By the time 50 Cent broke into mainstream success in 2003 with his debut album, Get Rich or Die Tryin', he had already been shot 9 times and survived. The streets knew him. The industry respected him. The fans idolized him. But even then, long before his name would appear on Forbes lists or his shows would dominate primetime television, 50 Cent had already identified Diddy as a potential adversary. Their paths didn't just cross, they collided. Diddy represented everything 50 Cent resented about the industry: artifice, manipulation, and a smug sense of untouchable power. The two clashed in interviews, in veiled lyrics, and most notably through the aggressive social media campaigns 50 became known for. At first, it seemed like entertainment, hip-hop beef at its most theatrical. But behind the memes and jabs was something deeper: suspicion. 50 Cent had long hinted at secrets swirling around Diddy's world, cryptic posts about freaky parties, subtle references to questionable relationships, and an insistence that things were not what they seemed behind the velvet curtains of Bad Boy Records. To the average fan, it was banter. To those paying closer attention, it was a warning. And now, in court, those warnings were weaponized into sworn testimony. But to understand why 50 Cent's words held such weight, we need to understand what he's become. He is no longer just a rapper. He is a mogul, a media powerhouse. From launching the G-Unit clothing brand and record label to inking a $150 million deal with vitamin water that shocked Wall Street, 50 Cent proved that he wasn't just a product of hip-hop, he was rewriting its rulebook. Later, he would reinvent himself again, this time as a television magnate. With his hit show, Power, and its numerous spin-offs, 50 Cent proved that his eye for narrative and cultural tension could dominate scripted television as effectively as he once dominated mixtape circuits. His success in Hollywood also distanced him from the insular, sometimes cult-like celebrity scenes in which Diddy often operated. This distance matters. Because while many insiders remained tied to Diddy through contracts, favors, or fear, 50 Cent operated independently. He had the money. He had the platform. He had the reach. But most importantly, he had nothing to lose and everything to expose. He also had a long history of outing powerful men when no one else would. 50 Cent called out Harvey Weinstein long before the mainstream media took allegations seriously. He mocked R. Kelly even when others continued to collaborate with him. And when whispers of Diddy's private life began surfacing in blogs and gossip sites, 50 wasn't whispering. He was shouting. "I've seen a lot," he said in past interviews. "And people don't say nothing because they're scared. But I ain't never been scared of a man. Especially not one hiding behind money and lies." That attitude alone gave his courtroom testimony unmatched credibility. Here was someone who had built a career by defying industry gatekeepers, now walking into a federal court to speak on what many considered an open secret, finally dragged into the spotlight. And it wasn't just what 50 said, it was how he said it. Calm, measured, deliberate. This wasn't the performative bravado of a rapper looking for headlines. This was a strategic dismantling of Diddy's fortress of secrecy. He outlined not just incidents, but systems. Not just behavior, but patterns. He named names with the kind of precision that made it difficult for anyone to dismiss it as gossip or exaggeration. Critically, his testimony didn't come off as vengeful. It came off as fed up. That distinction made all the difference. His feud with Diddy may have laid the groundwork for suspicion, but what unfolded in court was the voice of a man who had watched others fall victim to the same manipulations and finally decided to burn the entire operation down. Legal analysts were quick to note the significance. In a world where many accusers lacked the fame or financial backing to speak freely, 50 Cent stood uniquely positioned. He couldn't be blacklisted, he owned his empire. He couldn't be sued into silence, he had lawyers and resources. He couldn't be threatened, he had survived far worse. But perhaps the most powerful aspect of his presence in court was what it symbolized. The wall of silence had finally cracked, and it was the loudest voice in the room doing the cracking. Throughout his career, 50 Cent has played many roles: underdog, villain, hero, disruptor. He's sold records by the millions, survived assassination attempts, gone to war with some of the most influential names in entertainment. And each time, he's come out the other side sharper, bolder, and even more unfiltered. So when he walked into that courtroom, he didn't do it as a witness with something to prove. He did it as a force with nothing left to fear. He was speaking not just as an insider, but as a survivor of the industry's darkest corners, a man with his own scars, his own regrets, and a mission to rip the mask off an empire of silence. In the days following his testimony, cultural commentators and legal pundits alike echoed the same sentiment. This was more than a personal grudge. This was a statement, a warning shot. A declaration that the old ways of protecting predatory kings under the guise of industry royalty were no longer safe. And it couldn't have come from anyone more credible. The question now hanging in the air was this: if 50 Cent had this much to say, how many others were waiting for the moment to speak up? How many others had been silenced? And how many would now feel empowered to follow his lead? The courtroom saga was just beginning. But one thing was certain: 50 Cent had shifted the balance of power. And in doing so, he may have lit the fuse on an industry-wide explosion that would reverberate for years to come. The sun had barely risen over Manhattan when a line began forming outside the federal courthouse. By 7 a.m., journalists from nearly every major media outlet had secured their place in line, eager for a seat inside Courtroom 8C, where the impossible was set to happen. The internet had been buzzing for days with rumors that 50 Cent would testify in the federal case against Sean Diddy Combs, but few believed it would actually come to pass. Many assumed it was a PR ploy or perhaps a last-minute stunt. After all, in a city addicted to spectacle, not everything that trends online spills into real life. But by 10 a.m., as the last security sweep was completed and the courtroom doors creaked open, all speculation gave way to fact. The room filled with an almost reverent silence as the jurors filed in, followed by the legal teams, then the press pool. And then, with no announcement or theatrics, he entered. Curtis, 50 Cent, Jackson didn't swagger in like the world-famous rapper and media mogul he was. He walked in like a man who had come to bury something. Head up, eyes locked forward, his presence alone commanded the courtroom like an unscripted climax in a movie that had taken years to build. Diddy didn't look at him. He kept his head turned slightly downward, flipping through a notepad on the defense table, his fingers twitching slightly, betraying a nervous tension he had hidden for weeks. The presiding judge, a tall, stern woman known for her no-nonsense courtroom demeanor, looked down at the paperwork before her. "Mr. Jackson, please take the stand." The bailiff led him to the witness box. The room had gone still, so still it felt like everyone was holding their breath. Camera crews weren't allowed inside federal courtrooms, but the moment was so intense it felt cinematic regardless. For years, gossip blogs, social media threads, and hip-hop podcasts had speculated about what 50 Cent knew regarding Diddy's private dealings. Today, those whispers would be placed under oath. As 50 Cent sat down and raised his right hand, the bailiff administered the oath. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?" "I do," he replied. The prosecution began by walking through 50 Cent's history in the industry, his early years, rise to fame, business ventures, and, importantly, his long, turbulent history with Sean Combs. This wasn't just a background check, it was a strategic framing. The jury needed to understand not just the facts of 50's testimony, but the weight of his words. They needed to know that this wasn't a man trying to boost his profile or get revenge. He was someone who knew the business, the power players, and the coded language that operated behind the scenes. "Mr. Jackson," the lead prosecutor said, "you've spoken publicly in the past about questionable behavior within the music industry. Today, we'd like you to describe, in detail, what you've witnessed personally, specifically as it relates to the defendant." 50 Cent leaned into the mic, his voice low and deliberate. "You want me to talk about Diddy? Okay, let's talk about him." From that moment, the courtroom transformed from a legal arena into a psychological battleground. He spoke slowly, confidently, mapping out the contours of a world few had access to, and even fewer dared to discuss. He described parties held in off-the-grid mansions where phones were taken at the door and guests were required to sign confidentiality agreements. He spoke of luxury getaways masked as industry retreats that ended with blurred lines, blurred consent, and blurred memories. But the most shocking details came when he began naming individuals who had, according to him, been either coerced, manipulated, or outright abused under the guise of mentorship or opportunity. "There were nights you'd think were just about networking," 50 Cent testified, "but by the time you realized what was happening, it was too late. You were stuck. You either played along, or you disappeared. Career-wise, I mean." He described the psychological pressure Diddy allegedly used to maintain control, how young artists were praised, given gifts, and flown around the world, only to be subjected to quiet, progressive boundary pushing. First it's an invite to his house, then it's drinks, then it's a party, then it's something else. He isolates you from your team, from your people. That's how it always starts. The courtroom was frozen in attention. One juror, an older man in his 60s, kept his hand over his mouth for most of the testimony. Another, a younger woman in her 20s, kept darting glances toward Diddy as if expecting him to explode at any second. But Diddy sat stone still, arms crossed, occasionally whispering to his attorney, but never once looking directly at the man on the stand. The prosecution gave 50 Cent room to speak, knowing that this wasn't just testimony, it was a demolition. He laid out patterns, tactics, and motives with disturbing clarity. He described how Diddy had allegedly used not just his wealth, but his legend as leverage. "You're not going to say no to the man who gave Biggie a platform. That's how he thinks. He uses that legacy like a shield. Then came the list. Who were some of the individuals you believe were affected by this behavior? The prosecutor asked. 50 Cent paused for a moment, then answered in a tone that was both clinical and devastating. Usher, Justin Bieber, Kevin Hart, Fabulous, YK Osiris. Each name struck like a blow to the chest. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as if the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. The defense team didn't object. Not yet. Perhaps they were calculating. Perhaps they knew the moment they objected, they would validate the bombshell. So they sat, like everyone else, trying to grasp the enormity of what had just been said. These are people, 50 Cent continued, who either got pulled into his orbit or were around long enough to see what he was really about. Some of them knew what was going on. Some didn't. But none of them walked away unchanged. That statement seemed to shake the judge herself. She sat back slightly, took a slow sip of water, then instructed the court clerk to mark the names mentioned for the record. Legal observers in the gallery frantically scribbled into their notebooks, already imagining how these statements would echo in headlines around the world. After a short break, the defense team finally rose to cross-examine. The lead defense attorney, clearly rattled, tried to cast doubt on 50 Cent's intentions. Mr. Jackson, isn't it true that you have a long-standing public rivalry with my client? 50 Cent didn't flinch. You mean we don't like each other? Yeah, that's true. Doesn't mean I'm lying. And isn't it also true, the attorney continued, that you've used your social media platforms to mock and harass Mr. Combs for years? Yep. And everything I posted is still up. You can check it right now. Doesn't make this testimony any less real. The defense pushed harder, suggesting he was seeking attention, trying to redirect media focus toward himself. But 50 Cent remained composed. I'm rich. I'm famous. I've got my own businesses. I don't need attention, he said. But I'm tired of seeing people get away with hurting others just because they've got money and lawyers. By the end of the day, the courtroom had heard more truth than it was prepared for. As the judge called for adjournment, the gallery rose again, stunned into silence. There was no applause. No chaos. Just a deep, collective understanding that they had witnessed something irreversible. Outside the courthouse, the media frenzy exploded. News outlets from around the globe pushed out breaking stories. Social media lit up like a wildfire. The public wasn't just reacting, they were demanding answers, demanding justice, demanding accountability. And at the center of it all was 50 Cent, no longer just a cultural provocateur, but now something else entirely, a whistleblower, a witness, a man who stepped into the lion's den, looked his rival in the eye, and spoke without fear. The courtroom would return to order the following day. More testimonies would follow. More evidence would surface. But everyone knew the truth. This case had just changed forever. The moment 50 Cent took the stand, the trial wasn't just about Diddy anymore. It was about an industry, a system, and a history of silence that had finally been broken. When 50 Cent concluded his testimony, the courtroom remained suspended in a state of collective breathlessness. He hadn't just pointed a finger at Diddy. He had described a framework of corruption that was both intimate and institutional. But what truly shook the foundation of the case wasn't the celebrity names or the whispered rumors confirmed under oath. It was the disturbing architecture of control that 50 Cent outlined in terrifying detail. He didn't just talk about bad behavior or wild parties. He spoke about strategy. He spoke about a methodical process that began with kindness and ended in manipulation. A process that turned admiration into dependency, freedom into obedience. He spoke of grooming, not just in the traditional sense, but in a psychological, emotional, and professional sense that rendered his victims vulnerable without them even realizing it. In his own words, the grooming began with flattery. Diddy would target individuals, young, ambitious, often isolated, and make them feel seen. That was the bait. He'd meet them backstage, or at award shows, or through mutual connections in the industry. He'd charm them, study them, find their insecurities, and wrap himself around them like a blanket. Diddy made you feel like you were the only one in the room, 50 Cent told the court. He knew how to make people feel chosen. That's how it started for a lot of them. He'd talk about potential, about greatness. Then he'd tell you that greatness only happens with him guiding you. This psychological grooming, weaponized through validation, was the first step. The second was isolation. 50 Cent described how Diddy allegedly insisted on managing schedules, controlling communication, and inviting his targets to closed environments where even their closest advisors and friends were excluded. Once he's got you flying out with him, staying at his places, your whole world shrinks down to him, 50 Cent said. He's the center of everything. Your shows, your tours, your producers. It's like he builds a cage and convinces you it's a throne. Some of the most chilling moments in his testimony came when he described the rules imposed within Diddy's orbit. According to 50 Cent, individuals invited to Diddy's private events were often required to sign non-disclosure agreements at the door, forfeit their phones, and agree to behavioral expectations that blurred the line between professional and personal. These weren't regular contracts, he stated. They were psychological contracts. You start thinking that whatever happens in that house, or on that trip, or in that studio, has to stay there. Not because it's right, but because it's how you keep your place. He explained that for some, these arrangements began as creative collaborations, writing retreats, beat-making weekends, or brand-building sessions. But slowly, the environment shifted. The parties became stranger. The requests became more invasive. The boundaries faded. According to 50 Cent, one of Diddy's primary tools was the creation of what he referred to as pressure points, moments where individuals were either tested or cornered. These were carefully crafted situations where refusal would cost you everything. A party might suddenly turn intimate. A one-on-one meeting might suddenly include a demand. A private conversation might be recorded. And once someone crossed a line, whether under pressure or confusion, Diddy ensured they were never in a position to speak up again. Once you give in, once something happens, you're his, 50 Cent said. Because now he's got leverage. Maybe it's a tape. Maybe it's just the fear that if you say anything, you'll be the one painted as crazy or ungrateful. This climate of fear was at the core of the control structure. It wasn't just about secrets. It was about creating a system where telling the truth felt more dangerous than staying silent. Federal prosecutors followed up by introducing documents recovered in pretrial discovery, copies of non-disclosure agreements, digital communications, and testimonies from former staffers who corroborated the culture of isolation and control. One former personal assistant, who requested anonymity, provided a written statement describing the mental toll of working inside Diddy's inner circle. He would invite young artists to his mansion, and for a while, it was all positive, champagne, networking, recording sessions. Then it would change. They'd come out looking like they'd aged 5 years. Some never came back. Some became quiet. Psychological experts brought in by the prosecution explained how such control systems are common in high-profile abuse cases. One clinical psychologist testified that grooming isn't always sexual. It can be emotional, professional, and spiritual. It's about power. It's about slowly removing someone's sense of self until their only compass is the abuser. The jury listened intently as these details built upon 50 Cent's initial claims. It wasn't just his word anymore. A pattern was emerging, one woven through text messages, bank statements, legal settlements, and the trembling memories of people who had escaped the circle, but not the trauma. One particularly damning piece of evidence involved a private jet manifest linking Diddy to multiple individuals over the course of several years, some of whom were later named in leaked NDAs. Travel patterns revealed clusters of young performers being brought to secluded destinations in the Caribbean and Nevada, often for weekends with no professional output afterward. No music recorded, no videos shot, no branded deals closed. That's not a retreat, said the prosecutor. That's a trap. At this point in the trial, the defense had grown visibly tense. They attempted to suggest that such arrangements were common in the entertainment industry, that NDAs were standard, and that no criminal activity had been definitively proven. But the sheer volume of consistent, overlapping narratives combined with 50 Cent's devastating testimony left the courtroom leaning heavily in one direction. What made the grooming allegations particularly devastating wasn't just their content, it was the plausibility. This wasn't some wild, fantastical story told by a fringe figure. This was coming from one of the most successful men in hip-hop, with nothing to gain and everything to lose. And it wasn't just about sex or power. It was about a machine, a dark, calculated machine that took young talent and turned it into currency for one man's empire. 50 Cent's testimony reframed the trial. Diddy was no longer just on trial for trafficking or racketeering. He was now on trial for systemized psychological warfare. The industry itself was on trial for allowing it, enabling it, and protecting it. The jury seemed to sense the magnitude. Every word, every document, every whisper from the gallery carried the weight of history. Not just Diddy's history, but the history of an industry that had long operated behind tinted windows and luxury gates. At one point during cross-examination, the defense tried to discredit the claim that Diddy's parties were a front for manipulation. "Do you have direct evidence of coercion?" the attorney asked. 50 Cent looked at the lawyer for a long moment. "I saw people who were smiling on camera and crying in private. I saw people who came in confident and left broken. If you need a tape to believe that, you've already failed." The courtroom was silent again. In the days that followed, psychological experts dissected every part of 50's testimony on national news. The term grooming began trending globally, as did hashtags calling for transparency and protection for young entertainers. Industry veterans who had stayed silent for years began hinting at what they knew, with some issuing vague statements of regret, and others going dark on social media altogether. But the message was clear: the age of silence was over. The system had been exposed, and thanks to 50 Cent's courage and brutal honesty, the world was finally being forced to confront a culture that had, for far too long, masked abuse as mentorship and control as genius. There are moments in courtrooms that are rehearsed, controlled, and anticipated. Then there are moments that strike like lightning, unexpected, terrifying in their clarity, and impossible to walk back. The latter unfolded when 50 Cent dropped the names. Not hints, not insinuations. Actual names, spoken with chilling precision, each one detonating in the air like a grenade. It wasn't just who he named, it was how he said it. There was no malice in his voice, no smirk on his lips, no dramatic pause to heighten the drama. He spoke plainly, as though he were listing ingredients to a recipe. Except the recipe was the infrastructure of silence, grooming, and manipulation that had existed in the music industry for decades, and the ingredients were beloved celebrities, men known not just for their talent, but for their pristine, media-polished reputations. Usher, Justin Bieber, Kevin Hart, Fabulous, YK Osiris. The moment these names were mentioned, the courtroom felt like it was holding its breath for an eternity. The jurors sat frozen, wide-eyed and pale. A few journalists in the gallery gasped audibly. The stenographer's fingers faltered momentarily on the keys. There was no noise from Diddy's defense team. Even they, prepared for war, had not anticipated this caliber of collateral damage. The prosecutor, appearing composed but inwardly shocked, gave 50 Cent a moment before asking the obvious question. "Are you testifying, under oath, that these individuals were either directly involved in inappropriate conduct with Mr. Combs or were subjected to coercive environments orchestrated by him?" 50 Cent didn't blink. Yes, some were drawn in. Some were pushed. Some walked in willingly and walked out afraid. The courtroom didn't erupt in that moment, it imploded. It was too heavy, too massive for noise. But the ripples began immediately. Reporters in the media overflow room were already texting editors. Phones were buzzing in silent mode. The world was about to change, and everyone present knew it. The first name that sent chills down the spines of many was Usher. Known for his smooth voice, enduring hits, and clean-cut image, Usher had long been a pillar of modern R&B. But industry insiders remembered his early days with Diddy. In fact, the story of a young Usher living with Diddy as a teen was no secret. It had been mentioned in interviews over the years, always as a light-hearted memory. But in this context, those recollections took on a sinister tone. 50 Cent expanded on this, stating that during that time, Usher was subjected to an environment where boundaries didn't exist and pressure came dressed as opportunity. He didn't claim Usher was assaulted, but rather that he had been conditioned to view abnormal behavior as the price of fame. Next came Justin Bieber. The courtroom practically shifted on its axis at the mention of his name. The prosecution asked for clarification, hesitant and careful. "Mr. Bieber?" the prosecutor asked. "Are you suggesting he had a connection to Mr. Combs outside of public appearances?" 50 Cent nodded slowly. Diddy had a thing for fresh fame, and Bieber was the golden ticket at one point. He was around him. They spent a lot of time together early on. You do the math. He didn't elaborate beyond that, but he didn't need to. The implication was enough to send social media into full collapse just minutes later. Screenshots of old interviews, red carpet photos, and now deleted tweets were circulating in real time. The internet, for all its flaws, has a long memory and zero patience for ambiguity. Then came Kevin Hart, a comedian known for his charisma, his empire of films, and his carefully curated public image. 50 Cent paused a moment before addressing him. "I don't think Kevin even knows what happened to him," he said. "That's the thing with Diddy. He'll make you laugh, pour you a drink, and an hour later you're doing things you never imagined, surrounded by people you don't know, in a place you can't find again." This quote was not just haunting, it was prophetic. As soon as it hit the news cycle, internet detectives started digging into Kevin Hart's past appearances with Diddy, some as recently as a few years ago. A particular clip from an old awards show where Diddy jokingly called Hart his little secret began circulating like wildfire. Fabulous was next, a rapper who had kept a relatively low profile in recent years. His name may not have shocked as many outside hip-hop circles, but for those inside the industry, it was another confirmation of what many suspected. According to 50 Cent, Fabulous had been part of a second-tier circle, where he was used more as a recruiter than a victim. The prosecutor pressed him to elaborate. "He knew what was going on," 50 Cent explained. "He didn't organize it, but he played his role." It was a statement that sent a chilling message. This wasn't just about Diddy. There were layers, accomplices, enablers, people who knew enough to stay quiet and just enough to keep their hands clean. Then came YK Osiris, the youngest and perhaps least well-known name on the list. His mention shocked the room not because of fame, but because of vulnerability. Here was a young artist who had only just begun to gain traction in the industry, someone still finding his footing. To hear him listed alongside global superstars was disturbing. 50 Cent's statement about him was perhaps the most emotionally charged of the entire session. YK didn't know what he was walking into, he said, eyes darkening. He just wanted to be seen. He just wanted to matter. And Diddy used that. There was a long silence in the courtroom after that. A silence filled with moral weight. A silence that even the judge didn't interrupt. The prosecution returned to the strategy of framing, asking 50 Cent how these names were connected. Were they all present in the same spaces? Were there events or environments they all shared? He nodded. Not all at once, but over the years, yes. The same studios. The same writing sessions. The same trips. Diddy made sure the people around him rotated enough that no one could map the full picture. But I did. I've been watching. The defense finally objected, citing lack of concrete evidence. The judge sustained but did not strike the statement. It was already out there, embedded in the minds of the jurors and permanently etched into the court record. Outside the courtroom, the fallout was immediate. Media outlets couldn't publish fast enough. Social platforms collapsed under the weight of speculation. Some of the named celebrities issued immediate, if vague, denials through publicists. Others said nothing, choosing silence as their shield. Fan bases splintered. Old videos were pulled from YouTube. Podcasts went into emergency recording sessions. The public reaction was split, part disbelief, part horrified agreement. For every person defending the named celebrities, there were 5 more pointing to red flags, awkward interviews, or old tweets they believed supported the claims. What was undeniable, however, was that the courtroom had just become a battlefield for reputations far beyond Diddy's. The prosecution had intended to convict one man. What they now had was the beginning of a cultural inquisition. In the days that followed, entertainment lawyers reported a spike in calls from celebrities asking for advice on how to prepare for potential subpoenas or civil suits. PR teams scrambled to scrub damaging photos from the internet. Anonymous tips poured into tabloids and law enforcement agencies. Other artists, emboldened by 50 Cent's testimony, began hinting at their own stories. The silence was cracking. The defense, meanwhile, tried to spin the moment as a desperate stunt, an attempt by 50 Cent to reignite a rivalry and steal the spotlight. But the court of public opinion wasn't buying it. If anything, the measured nature of 50 Cent's delivery made the allegations more believable. He hadn't ranted. He hadn't speculated. He had simply stated what he believed to be the truth. And the world had listened. Back in the courtroom, the judge issued a stern warning. This case is not about the reputations of others. It is about the charges against Mr. Combs. Let us remain focused. But even she knew that the story had already outgrown the walls of her courtroom. The courtroom had barely begun to process the shock of the named list when the prosecution introduced the next chapter in their case, one that would escalate the scandal to an entirely new level. If the list of celebrities had cracked the dam, what followed sent it bursting open, an alleged collection of hidden recordings, videos captured in private, without full consent, documenting intimate encounters, some coercive, some outright criminal. These were the so-called freak-off tapes, and the government now had reason to believe they existed. The phrase freak-off had been murmured in hip-hop circles for years, usually cloaked in euphemism or brushed off as crude insider lingo for extravagant parties. But as it turned out, this wasn't just some urban legend or exaggerated joke. The phrase had a very real meaning, one that reached deep into the hidden rituals of Diddy's private world. According to testimony and investigative findings, the freak-offs were exclusive events hosted in remote locations where a select group of guests, often young artists, actors, influencers, and industry hopefuls, were invited under the guise of professional collaboration or elite networking. 50 Cent, in his testimony, was the first to give a formal name to the term in open court. They weren't parties, he said. They were setups. You think you're there to meet producers or label heads, but you're really part of a test. A freak-off. Diddy would sit back and watch what people were willing to do, and how far they'd go once you started mixing drinks, playing games, or adding pressure. He explained that at some of these events, hidden cameras were allegedly installed in bedrooms, bathrooms, and common areas of Diddy's mansions, penthouses, and safe houses. Some of the footage, 50 Cent claimed, had been weaponized as blackmail, used to control those who might later try to leave or speak out. This revelation stunned the courtroom. It was no longer a matter of morally questionable behavior. It was now potentially criminal surveillance, exploitation, and blackmail. In the wake of 50 Cent's claims, federal investigators moved quickly. Within days, a sealed motion was filed in court requesting access to multiple private properties owned or previously leased by Diddy, including his infamous Los Angeles mansion in Holmby Hills, his apartment in Manhattan's Tribeca district, and 2 beachside villas in the Bahamas. The prosecution argued that there was credible cause to believe that digital devices, security systems, or internal servers at these properties might contain evidence related to the alleged freak-off tapes. Meanwhile, the prosecution presented preliminary digital forensic evidence to the court. Though they did not yet have access to the alleged tapes, they displayed metadata from encrypted hard drives recovered in a past civil case against one of Diddy's production companies. The files were coded with vague labels, Session A, Intro 3, Beach Set, but all bore timestamps corresponding to past events, including weekend getaways and retreats mentioned in multiple testimonies. One former bodyguard, testifying anonymously, provided further insight. I was told to never question the cameras, he said. There were security feeds in rooms that didn't need security, closets, bathrooms. One night, I heard screaming coming from a guest room. I started to intervene, but my superior pulled me back and said, "That's part of the process. Don't be a hero." After that, I stopped asking questions. When asked if he believed guests were aware of the recordings, the bodyguard shook his head. Some might have suspected, but most had no clue. The cameras weren't out in the open. They were hidden in speakers, smoke detectors, even inside the TVs. The term secret rooms also emerged during this phase of the trial. These were described as soundproof chambers within Diddy's homes, some locked behind sliding panels, others disguised as normal guest suites. These rooms, according to testimonies, were where the most disturbing activities occurred. Some witnesses claimed these spaces were stocked with recording equipment, specialized lighting, and even restraints. One former house manager, also testifying under a court-issued pseudonym, confirmed the existence of a panic room in Diddy's Holmby Hills estate that had been repurposed into what she called a filming chamber. She testified that the room had thick padding, a biometric lock, and was accessible only via fingerprint scan registered to Diddy himself and one unnamed assistant. I once saw a group of young men escorted in there, she said. They were buzzed, laughing, but clearly nervous. 2 hours later, they came out looking completely different. Pale, confused. One of them was crying. When the prosecution asked if she believed those events were consensual, she hesitated before responding. They didn't look like they agreed to what happened. They looked like they didn't understand what happened. The defense tried to block this line of argument, claiming it was purely speculative and designed to stir public outrage. But the prosecution countered that these accounts supported an ongoing pattern of entrapment, coercion, and surveillance. They also presented a financial trail, payments made to non-disclosure consultants, cybersecurity firms, and hush money settlements with language referencing event recordings, private session control, and reputation management. The most damning moment came when prosecutors revealed a sworn deposition from a former IT contractor who claimed to have been hired to wipe specific hard drives from a hidden server room in Diddy's Manhattan apartment. He said he needed a reset for all the party footage, the technician wrote. When I asked what it was, he laughed and said, "Footage I can use when people forget who made them." This alleged statement shifted the perception of the court. Diddy was no longer just a manipulator. He was now a man accused of constructing an archive of blackmail material designed to keep the rich and powerful obedient, and the young and vulnerable terrified. Outside the courthouse, the phrase "freak-off tapes" went viral in less than an hour. Social media erupted with speculation. Fans, bloggers, and even fellow artists demanded the government release the footage if it existed. Some begged for clarity. Others feared what it would reveal. Digital sleuths online began piecing together guest lists from past parties, scanning years of photos, and creating timelines matching the tape's suspected recording dates. Several influencers, who had once bragged about being invited to Diddy's exclusive retreats, swiftly deleted posts or issued statements distancing themselves from those events. The panic was palpable. Yet with all the frenzy, no tapes had been shown in court. The government was still working to obtain them. But the mere suggestion of their existence had already restructured the cultural narrative. The idea that some of the industry's brightest stars may have been unknowingly recorded in vulnerable, possibly exploitative situations sent shockwaves through the entertainment world. Legal experts on cable news debated the implications. If the recordings did exist, what charges could be added? Could individuals named in the tapes sue Diddy for illegal surveillance? Would those complicit in enabling or covering up the operation also face charges? And how many reputations were now hanging by a thread? Some said the trial had gone too far, that the public's desire for scandal was outpacing the evidence. Others argued it hadn't gone far enough. They demanded accountability not just from Diddy, but from an industry that had enabled him for decades, turning a blind eye as rumors grew darker and whispers turned into screams behind closed doors. Inside the courthouse, the judge ordered a sealed session to review forensic reports from the FBI's cybercrime unit. Though the details of that session remain undisclosed, leaks suggested that several files were recovered intact, including one 47-minute clip marked only with the label Fireplace Room Session 09/18. Courtroom analysts speculated that this could be the turning point in the case. If the content matched the descriptions provided by witnesses, it wouldn't just validate 50 Cent's claims. It would open the floodgates to further charges, lawsuits, and federal investigations. Back in court, 50 Cent had one last message during redirect examination. "I tried to warn people years ago," he said. "I told them what I'd seen. They called me bitter, jealous, crazy. Now I've told the truth in the one place where truth has weight. You don't have to believe me. Just press play when they bring in the tapes." And with that, he stepped off the stand. The courtroom, again, was silent. As the courtroom reels from 50 Cent's testimony and the chilling introduction of the alleged freak-off tapes, a darker realization settles in among legal analysts, journalists, and even fellow artists watching from afar. What's unfolding in real time isn't just a legal battle between one man and the state. It's an unmasking of the music industry's long-standing, unspoken code of complicity. What had once been whispered backstage, hinted at in interviews, or joked about in lyrics now stood bare, exposed beneath the harsh fluorescent lights of federal justice. From the outside, the music industry has always thrived on glitz, luxury, and an intoxicating illusion of freedom. It sells rebellion, charisma, and control, particularly in hip-hop and R&B. The artist is the master of their destiny, the rebel-turned-millionaire. But behind the velvet ropes and luxury jets lies a much older system, a hierarchy as rigid and abusive as any ancient monarchy, with gatekeepers who don't just guard the palace, they own it. For decades, powerful figures like Sean Diddy Combs existed at the peak of this food chain. Diddy wasn't just a producer or entrepreneur. He was, for many, the crown king of black entertainment, a man who turned talent into gold, and gold into legend. But as testimony after testimony unfolds, it's clear that beneath that crown sat a very different kind of ruler. One who thrived on control, isolation, and fear. The mechanisms of that control are becoming clearer by the day. Non-disclosure agreements were just the surface. Beyond that, there was what insiders now describe as a network of quiet coercion, reputation manipulation, career sabotage, ghosting, silent blackballing, and financial traps disguised as gifts. The very people who were supposed to protect rising stars, managers, agents, PR specialists, often acted as buffers, shielding powerful figures like Diddy from scrutiny and ensuring that the silence of the vulnerable was maintained. In this climate, to speak out meant exile. to expose men extinction. For most artists, especially black artists in a system already stacked against them, that choice was devastatingly simple: comply, stay silent, or disappear. One former Bad Boy Records artist, speaking anonymously to the press just days after 50 Cent's testimony, described it this way: "We knew. We all knew. But you don't go against the system unless you're ready to lose everything. I had friends who tried, and now they're working security or selling cars. Not because they weren't talented, but because they said the wrong thing to the wrong person." This fear wasn't just social, it was economic. Young artists, many from disadvantaged backgrounds, entered the music business with dreams of freedom. Instead, they found themselves trapped in predatory contracts, tied to powerful men who controlled their income, their branding, and even their public image. Touring schedules were used to exhaust them. Publicity campaigns were crafted to keep them smiling. And any deviation from the script? That was handled quietly, either with a threat, a payout, or a smear campaign. It was this culture of systemic control that allowed alleged abuses to flourish in plain sight. The same studios where platinum albums were recorded also served as silent prisons for emotional manipulation. The same platforms that launched careers also crushed dissent. According to internal memos leaked from several entertainment firms in the days following 50 Cent's appearance, executives had been aware of Diddy's peculiar behavior for years. But rather than investigate, they chose to contain. In one now viral email from 2015, a high-ranking executive wrote, "We're aware of the rumors. Just keep him out of press cycles and reinforce friendly placements." Another memo, dated 2018, referenced an incident at the villa and instructed staff to ensure all involved are contacted with offers before TMZ gets wind. It wasn't just music labels involved in this complicity. Talent agencies, luxury brands, and even tech platforms that hosted Diddy's content played a role in protecting the empire. Streams meant profits. Profits meant silence. The entertainment ecosystem had become too dependent on the very men it should have policed. The manipulation didn't stop at artists. Diddy, like many in his position, often surrounded himself with influencers, minor celebrities, and up-and-comers, offering them just enough proximity to fame to keep them loyal. These individuals were often the gatekeepers of the inner circle, acting as unofficial recruiters or buffers. They were the ones who told new faces, "It's just how the industry works. Don't take it personally," or "Everybody does it." In reality, these individuals helped normalize abuse, confuse consent, and erase boundaries, all while protecting their own access to power. One such influencer, who had attended a now infamous 2019 retreat hosted by Diddy in the Bahamas, described what she saw in a confidential interview. "It felt like a dream at first. We were flown out, pampered, surrounded by stars. Then the energy shifted. People got drunk fast. Strangers were overly touchy. You'd wake up the next morning not fully remembering what happened, but convinced that asking questions would get you kicked off the trip, or worse." She added, "I told myself it was just one weird weekend. Now I'm realizing it was something else entirely. Something planned." As the public absorbed these details, many began connecting the dots between past scandals and current revelations. The 2000s-era rumors about Diddy's notorious afterparties. The whispers of his obsession with control. The artist who vanished from the spotlight after brief stints with Bad Boy. In hindsight, the signs had always been there. They were just hidden beneath the glimmer of success. The music industry had become a mirror of Hollywood in the #MeToo era. Powerful men reigning unchallenged, protected by a web of enablers, and elevated by a system that prized profit over people. The parallels were too obvious to ignore. And just like Harvey Weinstein once ruled an empire of influence, Diddy's grip extended beyond beats and verses. It extended into the personal, sexual, and psychological lives of those who sought success through him. Even veteran industry insiders, those once considered untouchable, began to speak out. A respected producer with more than 3 decades in hip-hop told reporters off-record, "There's a reason I stopped going to his events. Too many red flags. Too many broken kids leaving those houses." Still, others chose silence, either out of fear or protection. Some issued carefully worded statements condemning abuse while refusing to name names. Others offered vague support for victims without acknowledging their own proximity to the accused. This hesitation only added to public outrage. Social media campaigns began calling out artists, executives, and influencers who had remained suspiciously quiet. Hashtags like #WhoKnewWhat Hashtag silence is complicity, and hashtag music industry reckoning began trending. The demand was simple: speak now or be seen as part of the problem. As momentum built, advocacy groups seized the moment. Organizations supporting survivors of abuse in the entertainment industry called for comprehensive reforms, transparent vetting processes, independent watchdogs, mandatory safe spaces for touring artists, and more. For the first time in years, there was a serious push to dismantle the cultural machinery that had enabled predators for so long. The trial of Sean Combs had sparked more than legal consequences. It had triggered a cultural implosion. And at the heart of it was one simple, unavoidable truth: silence had protected the powerful for too long. 50 Cent's testimony didn't just illuminate Diddy's alleged crimes. It pulled back the curtain on an entire ecosystem of exploitation, revealing a business where manipulation was normalized, coercion was professionalized, and the victims were left with nothing but trauma and NDAs. Now, with the world watching, the question was no longer whether the industry had a problem. It was whether it would have the courage to fix it. By the time 50 Cent stepped down from the witness stand, his testimony had already traveled far beyond the walls of the courtroom. His words had triggered a social and cultural firestorm, destabilizing not only Diddy's public image but the reputation of the entertainment industry at large. Every major news outlet, social media influencer, podcast host, and radio personality had weighed in. But now it was the defense's turn. And in the courtroom, no amount of public support could shield 50 Cent from the next phase of the trial: cross-examination. The courtroom was silent as Diddy's lead attorney rose from the defense table. A man known for his cold efficiency and brutal courtroom tactics, he adjusted his glasses and slowly approached the witness stand. This was the moment the defense had prepared for, their opportunity to strike back, to poke holes in 50 Cent's credibility, and to sow doubt in the minds of the jury. The goal wasn't necessarily to erase everything the rapper had said, but to make the jury question the motivations behind it. "Mr. Jackson," the attorney began calmly, "you've testified here today about deeply disturbing behavior and made serious allegations about my client. But let's begin with you. Would you say you have a personal bias against Mr. Combs?" Without hesitation, 50 Cent replied, "Absolutely." The courtroom stirred. Even some jurors arched their eyebrows. The defense attorney nodded, as if pleased. "So, for the record, you're admitting that you and Mr. Combs have a long-standing public feud?" "I've never hidden that," 50 said plainly. "But being biased doesn't mean I'm lying. It means I'm done pretending people like him deserve to be protected." The defense pressed forward. "You've used your social media platforms to insult, mock, and taunt Mr. Combs on numerous occasions. You've called him a fraud, a freak, a manipulator, even a predator, all without ever presenting formal evidence before this trial. Isn't it true that your public campaign against him has been ongoing for nearly a decade?" "I've posted memes," 50 replied. "I've made jokes. But this isn't a joke. I'm under oath now. And what I'm saying here isn't for entertainment. It's the truth." The lawyer didn't flinch. "Let's talk about timing. You chose to come forward now, during the peak of a federal investigation that threatens to put Mr. Combs behind bars. You could have gone to the authorities years ago. Why now?" 50 leaned forward slightly. "Because the game was rigged until now. Nobody would have listened. You think the feds were interested in my Instagram rants? I came here now because people are finally listening." The attorney nodded again, calm and unshaken. "But wouldn't you agree that your presence in this courtroom, your very decision to testify, has significantly increased media attention around you? Book sales, streams of your old music, renewed interest in your TV shows, this all benefits you financially, doesn't it?" "If I wanted more money, I'd drop another album," 50 said. "I don't need to be here. But I am." The defense, growing slightly more aggressive, tried to corner him on specifics. "Mr. Jackson, can you produce a single piece of hard evidence, one recording, one document, one eyewitness account, directly confirming that these so-called freak-off tapes exist?" "They exist," 50 said calmly. "You'll see that soon enough. I don't need to play them for you when the FBI's already looking." "But you haven't seen them yourself, have you?" the attorney asked, seizing the moment. "I've seen parts," 50 answered, his tone still cool. "Years ago. Enough to know what he keeps locked away." The defense lawyer pivoted. "Let's talk about your testimony regarding artists like Usher, Bieber, and Kevin Hart. Are you aware that defaming someone under oath without evidence can lead to lawsuits? You named men with families, careers, reputations. What do you say to them?" 50 Cent looked directly at the jury. "I say if they got nothing to hide, they should come forward and say it themselves. They were there. They know what happened. If I'm lying, they'll prove it. But I'm not the one who invited them into those rooms. For a moment, the attorney seemed to stumble, not because he'd lost his place, but because 50 Cent's refusal to be rattled disrupted the script. This wasn't a panicked witness. This wasn't someone trying to defend a shaky story. It was a man whose words had already caused irreversible impact, and he wasn't backing down. The defense attempted another strategy, highlighting inconsistencies in the timeline. They pulled up past interviews where 50 Cent had joked about Diddy's behavior without ever framing it as criminal. You've said on The Breakfast Club that Diddy's parties were weird and wild, but you laughed as you said it. If it was so serious, why didn't you treat it that way back then? Because that's what we were taught to do, 50 answered. Laugh it off. Make it a meme. The minute you say the truth out loud, they label you a hater or jealous or bitter. But the truth has a way of catching up. The defense tried to shift blame again, this time suggesting 50 Cent had a vendetta because he was allegedly denied business opportunities with Diddy. Isn't it true that you once sought a partnership with Bad Boy Records and were turned down? That's false, 50 said. I built my own empire. I never needed his. In fact, people warned me not to speak out because of how much pull he had. But here I am. The lawyer's tone hardened. And yet, despite all this alleged trauma and exploitation you claim to have witnessed, you remained silent for years. Were you complicit? 50 Cent didn't hesitate. We were all complicit. Everyone who stayed quiet. Everyone who looked away. Including me. That's why I'm here. Not to pretend I was perfect, but to make sure the silence stops. It was a devastating answer, simple, honest, and impossible to refute. The defense attorney, visibly frustrated, attempted one last angle. You want to burn Diddy's empire down. That much is clear. But isn't this just revenge disguised as justice? I don't care if he goes broke, 50 said. I care if the next kid doesn't get tricked into thinking that kind of abuse is the price of success. That line landed hard. Not just with the jury, but with the room. Even those watching from the gallery, reporters, bloggers, family members of other plaintiffs, could feel the momentum swing again. The judge, who had watched the exchange carefully, finally interrupted. Let's move forward. Mr. Jackson has answered the question. By the time the defense ended their cross-examination, the goalposts had barely moved. They tried to paint 50 Cent as vengeful, opportunistic, biased. But what the jury saw was a man unafraid to admit his flaws, a man who acknowledged his past silence but chose, at great personal risk, to speak anyway. And in the world of courtroom battles, that kind of honesty, raw, unscripted, uncoached, is often more powerful than any piece of evidence. Outside the courtroom, the damage control machine kicked into high gear. Diddy's representatives issued a statement condemning false narratives born of personal vendettas, while his legal team hinted at countersuits and defamation cases. But the energy had shifted. The public wasn't asking whether 50 Cent was telling the truth. They were asking who else would step forward next. Cross-examination was supposed to dismantle him. Instead, it cemented his credibility. Because in the end, the man on the witness stand had already survived bullets, bankruptcy, and betrayal. And now, even with the full force of Diddy's legal machine pressing down on him, he remained standing unshaken.